Eric, good morning. Welcome back.
Good morning. How are you?
How are you doing?
Actually, fantastic. I feel like Tony the Tiger after the kids get their Frosted Flakes.
So here,
Great.
so you announced what date that you were running for this seat.
Technically, we announced January 2nd.
So January 2nd.
Yep.
And you've never run for office before.
Have not.
And it's so as Joe Higgins has said about running for office, it's like drinking from the fire hose.
It is. It is a whole new learning experience.
Explain, you're 60 days into this now.
Yeah.
Tell us the 60-day journey so far, because I know it's been both fast and furious.
Yeah, we've been sprinting pretty hard. And actually, I'd like to say that we've probably made more progress than all the other primary candidates combined, which is kind of nice. But I think that just goes to a strong work ethic. You know, if you're putting in 13, 14-hour days, you're going to be very successful.
And you got a good team.
And we got a good team. We're putting people together that are successful, not only in the business community, Tucson locally, but in the political world. So the nice thing is that when people have a little bit of faith in you, it goes a little bit further. It's a situation where, I like people. I want to help Southern Arizonans. I'm a Southern Arizona from Tucson, local business owner, done a lot of charitable stuff, a lot of volunteer stuff. So when you do those sort of things, it's pretty easy to get people on board because they're kind of rooting for you.
You ever notice that 97% of the people who run for office say, I'm a small business owner? It just seems to happen that way.
Yeah.
You truly are a bona fide small business owner.
Yeah, I've worked in the pest control industry for many years, paid my dues as a technician, became vice president of a company. For 13 years, I've owned my own company, providing for our employees, providing benefits, helping them, having relationships, because there's much a part of your family is your own family.
Sure.
And started a second business out of some volunteer work we did with the Hitting Factory, which is an indoor baseball, softball facility, kind of way to give back to the community for the kiddos.
Right by Crossroads Park and the Lehman Academy. I was just at the Lehman Academy for a tour on Monday.
Yep.
And there it was.
Yeah, it's a nice facility. It's 15,000 square feet, and it's gender equitable. My daughter played softball, so that was a big part. A lot of times you have a hitting facility, and it's a bunch of baseball cages, and the girls get a cage. But for us, we made sure that it's equitable to both sports because I'm a little bit biased, and that's a lot due to my daughter. She was super awesome.
Hey, I got a super awesome soccer player daughter.
You know exactly what I'm talking about.
I know exactly how this works. What's a question from constituents of CD2 that keeps popping up that is kind of maybe one you didn't expect that you kept on getting?
Water rights is a big issue when we start getting in Cochise. It's
Sure.
not that it's unexpected, but there's concerns with people that have private wells out there. Border security. I mean, we hear that controversy a lot, but that's kind of an interesting one. And because of the fact that they want to reduce the negative behaviors like human trafficking, drug smuggling, those sort of things. But we have a very positive outlook with cultural history with Mexico. I mean, let's be honest, Tucson's been here a long time.
Yep.
And we have a shared history, but we also want to have a thriving economic relationship with Mexico as well. So I think having that positive business engagement, it's one of those things that on your show you always ask, what is Tucson known for?
Right.
And you struggle with this, often.
Right.
And I think there's a real logistics opportunity. I mean, if you look at some of our ports of entry, you have 1,800 trucks coming through that border every single day.
Sure.
There's $600 million of economic trade with Mexico on an annual basis. And what people don't even realize, there's $270 million of American jobs and American goods going down south.
Sure.
So those trucks aren't coming one way. A lot of our trucks and our farmers and our ranchers, they're providing goods going down south to Mexico. So if we can work on that infrastructure and we can actually provide positive momentum, improve our ports of entries, the roadways going back and forth between both countries, economically, Tucson could really take hold of that. Southern Arizona, even smaller communities like Douglas has a prominent port of entry. Sierra Vista. So a lot of these communities can provide the benefits. So if you can combine good border security to reduce the negative behaviors, encourage the positive behaviors of economic trade and the benefits there, then I think we have a real winning formula that we could capitalize here in CD2.
What are you hearing from people who are using the port of entries on how do we make it better?
Yeah, actually, it's funny is when you're a small business owner, you meet all kinds of people, right?
Right.
And so guys coming up from Mexico getting hitting lessons from one of our instructors, and he owns a trucking company down in Mexico.
Oh, okay.
And one of his challenges, when you have a truckload of goods, it'll take 5.5 hours to get through a port of entry. Now, think if you're trying to have a relationship with Walmart and you have a deadline to get your vehicle through that port of entry, to get produce from down south up here, and you get holed up at that port of entry, you're out of load. And it makes it hard to do business.
Walmart's known for not being very forgiving. If they give you a date to get so many oranges, apples, cherries, whatever it is, to that store by a certain time and you don't get there,
you're done.
You just bought yourself a truckload of strawberries.
Yeah, and what do you do with it at that point? So some of the issues that are facing the port of entry is just the logistics of the port of entries because they haven't been upgraded in years. Trying to get some better electronics down there so that you fast pass through the TSA. You can do the same thing down south. There's a lot of imaging technology and those sort of things to screen the vehicles. And if you have vendors that are trusted.
Staffing? Staffing's always been an issue.
Staffing is a major issue, but it's not just staffing because of the job down there. It's also the staffing with the relationship to the spouse. So it's a situation that, you go down to Nogales and you go down to Douglas, and most of us have these 2-family households. They don't have a job down south that they can do for the spouse. So you have to look at, do you have a quality education for the kids that are down there? Do you have an opportunity for the spouse to advance? Plus the officer that needs to be there. So we're not even talking that logistic. But what I've actually found is that talking to some of these partners, that there are companies that come from Mexico that are willing to put jobs here in the United States to help out. And there's also companies in the United States willing to provide some of those jobs and infrastructure as well if we could give them a little bit of a helping hand. So I think when you look at creating jobs down there, it's not just saying, hey, here's our help wanted ad on Craigslist,
right?
Looking for officers. I know they don't do that,
right?
But figuratively speaking, there has to be more of a plan that's sustainable in order to get those officers and those people, their spouses, the opportunities for their kids, so that when they grow up, that they have all the same opportunities everybody else does.
And my last thing on this before we go to break is Martha has brought up the fact that it takes way too long to hire a Customs and Border Patrol, a border protection agent.
Yeah, it's brutal in the process that end up having to do. And, and those are hard jobs to fill. I mean, there are some social stigmas that come with those jobs, and they get beaten up regularly by media, press, those sort of things. And a lot of these people are just hardworking people that want to do right for our country. And something in law enforcement, you don't think of as the traditional cop, but they're obviously in that wheelhouse. And so we need to be very supportive of them and encourage people to come in and kind of change the tone and narrative there.
We're hanging out with Eric Ruden, and that's Ruden for Congress, RUDEN for FOR Congress.com. So a big question when I look at all these big issues that comes up, of course, that the Republicans have done tax reform, and I think that's played out for a lot of great business owners in this town and the average taxpayer.
Absolutely.
But one thing that's still on the board is that we still need to tackle is health care.
Yep, absolutely.
They almost got it done, but a certain possible U.S. senator put a kibosh on that. So as a guy who has, how many employees do you guys have at the pest control company?
Right now, about 30.
30. And you provide health insurance for them?
Yes, actually, we provided health insurance before the Affordable Care Act. Can you imagine that craziness?
You mean you actually used it as an incentive for recruitment and retention?
Yeah, it's amazing when you actually cared about your employees and you wanted to do something nice just because you want to have them for a long time. Yeah, it's a really crazy thought.
So what have you learned as a business owner providing health care, and what are lessons from that you think you can take to Congress, I guess?
Yeah. I have to admit, I actually think I might be a pseudo-expert in this particular field, because when you're a small business owner, and a lot of business owners can relate, is you have to evaluate your health care insurance every single year.
Sure.
And you try to negotiate down, get the prices, make it as affordable as possible for your employees. And then you get to sit there and talk to your insurance representative, and you discuss the Affordable Care Act, how that went, and you get to learn a lot. And plus, I also have the privilege of knowing a few doctors that actually work at hospitals and people that have done billing and those sort of things. So It gives me a lot of insight into how the healthcare process works. But I'll give an example of how government healthcare has damaged small businesses.
Okay.
And then maybe some solutions that maybe we can fix some of these things that are a little bit common sense. The first thing is, when my employees had healthcare prior to the Affordable Care Act, and that's also known as Obamacare for a few people, is that when they paid their health insurance, after the 50% employer contribution, because we paid for half, they only paid $38 a paycheck for their health insurance, which is actually fairly low and affordable. Now, as soon as the Affordable Care Act was passed, within 2 years, their health insurance, after the 50% contribution, more than doubled. And one of those reasons that right off the board was the no limit on health insurance caps that came through. So the premise is that you could spend an unlimited amount on health insurance. So if you spent $4 million a year, the insurance company had to provide that, which most people don't spend $4 million a year on health care. But it opened up a lot of liability exposure to these companies that they had to assume that risk, and that's how they pass that cost to the premiums.
Right.
So, for example, in like our workforce, most of our employees are younger males. They're usually typically between the ages of 21 and 40. So their concerns in healthcare may be related to the fact, hey, if I get a broken leg, if I have the flu, I'm going to get some antibiotics. They're not looking for that long-term placement in the hospital for a long time. So our original healthcare plan had an annual limit of $250,000. And you can get a whole lot of healthcare for $250,000.
Correct.
So by having a limit that an employer can customize, according to their workforce and their health needs, because if we're going to be really honest about healthcare, a 25-year-old male and an 80-year-old female might have some different healthcare needs.
Right.
And from a common sense standpoint, even the standpoint of other gender issues, I mean, if you've already completed your family and, you've taken measures so you don't have kids and those sort of things, do you really need coverage for pregnancy?
Right.
So if you can create a little bit of affordability, and either as an employer or as an employee, however you want to slice that pie, the reality is that if you can customize that plan to a certain extent, you can bring down the health care because you limit the insurance company's exposure.
Even if you, let's say you tripled, right, and you said, well, I'm going to cover everyone for $750,000.
Yep.
There's still a known quantity, because nothing scares insurance companies more than, there's no cap.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're just going to really jam everyone just to make sure.
Yeah, and those numbers, you can negotiate all those numbers. You can do those sort of things. But if you can reduce the exposure from the insurance company, then at that point you can get a little bit more affordable rate. So that's one solution that you could possibly have to lower healthcare costs.
So we've covered a little bit of economics.
Yep.
We talked about healthcare border. Let's just talk about CD2. What are you learning? It's such a diverse district.
It's definitely a diverse community. If you look at it, it's split in thirds. Obviously, a third Dem, and it leans a little bit Dem. It's a 1% advantage. But then a third Republican and a third Independents. And we really have an independent vibe here in Tucson, and it is very difficult, I think, from a district standpoint for a Republican like myself, because, everybody always thinks we're angry and intense, and actually we're pretty neutral and tame people. And the reality is I've grown up in Tucson and Pima County my entire life, and many of my friends are Democrats, and we are able to get along on a lot of issues. But being a fiscal guy, I think I reach across the aisle pretty well, because if you really want to solve anything, you have to listen to a lot of voices. And, when you're focusing on fiscal issues and economy issues, I think you'd be successful. If you look at Tucson, I think Jim Colby did a really good job of reaching across the aisle. Gabrielle Giffords did a very good job reaching across the aisle, and I think Martha McSally did as well. So we kind of have a history of representation that's pro-community first, tends to do really well. And representation that's not pro-community first and their interest is their own, I think they don't do so well.
Tell me about let's leave you off on one easy issue.
Okay.
Medicare. I've heard it in your commercials. This is something that you want to try to bring some sort of reasonable reform to. What's your take on how to get our hands around Medicare?
Well, the first thing that I think people need to understand, and these are government estimates, these aren't my estimates, that in 6 years that Medicare can be insolvent. So one of the problems that we have with Medicare and Social Security, they kind of fall on the same lump sum in some regards, is that they automatically get funded every single year without even looking at the budget package. A majority of our budget is pretty much locked, which people don't understand. It's not like we actually review these things.
Right.
So as a business owner, the first thing that I generally do each year is I look at how my business performs and I make an adjustments, the good things and the bad things, and I look at my financial portfolio and hey, what are some of the good things and bad things? And when we look at these trust funds that are the largest trust funds in the world,
right,
and they get auto-renewed and no one ever reviews them. They never actually say, hey, what's working and not. So,
even though we don't have much money to actually cover the actual money without borrowing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we keep kicking this can down the road instead of actually doing anything. And the longer you wait, the harder it is. So one of the things is, everybody talks about Medicare fraud. They realize there's fraud in the system, but we won't even open up the package to evaluate the fraud, to see how deep it is, to make the changes in there. So
Medicare fraud's like cheating in the NCAA athletics. Yeah. Everyone knows it kind of goes on, but it's kind of part of the game.
But the problem is that you can say it's part of the game,
right,
but now it's going to start really hurting people.
Sure.
Because when you go insolvent and you end up losing a very large percentage of your benefits, that really hurts people. And my whole thing with Medicare and Social Security is pretty simple. I'm not the anti-Medicare Social Security person. I just want my children, my kids, to have the same benefits that my parents had.
Right.
And I don't think that's an unreasonable request. And if you're going to put it off and you're not going to work on these things, then that's problematic. And I think as a representative and being a budget guy, those are things that I want to try to help solve.
Well, again, I think that's a good way to put it, right? The idea that I kind of like this thing maybe to be around. There's a promise here.
Yeah, absolutely. We've paid into the system. There's a contract. And let's be really frank about it. It's a situation where, people do want the comfort of Social Security and Medicare. You can say, hey, I want to privatize and I want to do these things and, this should be the private sector. And maybe there are some solutions down the road that have that. But people like the fact that there is a certain amount of security, and they like the fact that, hey, I've paid into the system for 30, 40, 50 years, and I need to get back what I've invested and what I've been promised. And if you can't start on that basis, you're going to not do very well with this particular issue.
All right. Check out RudenForCongress.com. Eric, good seeing you again as always, sir.
Nice. Have a good day.
You too, sir.